You're listening the Virtual CISO podcast, providing the best insight on information security and security IT advice to business leaders everywhere.
Hey there, and welcome to yet another episode of the Virtual CISO podcast. With you, as always, your host, John Verry, and with me today, a recent visitor to the podcast, and now on a second time, Eric Gumanofsky. Hey, Eric.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for coming back on. Enjoyed the first conversation. If anyone has not listened to it yet, I thought Eric did a phenomenal job of clarifying some things around CNAP. So take a listen to that one. I think you'll enjoy that. I always start simple. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do every day.
Sounds good. So I'm actually starting my new role right now. Today, I'm the Vice President for Product Innovation here at Tenable Security. So my role is to help Tenable structure its future capabilities, broadly speaking, in all the areas that Tenable is involved in. Prior to that, I was leading the Tenable Cloud Security product organization. And in that role, my responsibility was to direct the product development in our cloud security domain.
So since the last time we chatted, new role?
Correct.
Congratulations. Is it one you wanted or one that they asked you to take on?
So I wasn't planning on it, but when our CEO asked me to take this new responsibility, I wholeheartedly agreed. I think it's a great opportunity, and it's super exciting to look at the most innovative technologies out there and how we can take Tenable as a company to new heights. Is super challenging and super exciting, obviously.
Welcome. Congratulations. I know the last time we chatted, when I asked you what your drink of choice was, you said whatever the coolest sounding special is, and you'll fall back to a G&T. Have you had any cool drinks since the last time we chatted?
So I had a couple pretty good espresso martinis. So
that's funny you should mention that. I was out at we have something in the U.S. called a Costco, which is like these warehouse type clubs, and occasionally they'll have a liquor store associated with them, and I've never seen one that did, and I went to one unusual for me, and I was like, wow, they got a liquor store. I'd love to see what it was. So I went in, and I ended up with there wasn't all that impressive, to be blunt, but I did end up with this. I bought a grinder, Grindr. It's this espresso based. And for the first time I've ever have in the last few weeks since we chatted, made espresso martinis at home. So we're running in this kind of like parallel path here, which is a little bit odd. But yeah, a good espresso martini. And I went out and bought all the stuff that you needed for the Kahlua and a nice vanilla vodka. So it's been I've had a few myself.
Well, I'm based out of Tel Aviv, and whenever I travel to the US, I'm always fighting the jet lag, and it really helps me, right? Because you're out there, you're drinking socially, but you're in parallel to that also having some espressos keeps you awake.
Yeah, and probably I would argue that the espresso is healthier than Red Bull. I mean, you could go Red Bull and vodka, but I don't think the Red Bull's all that good for you. So
I think I passed that when I was 18. Right?
Yeah, and we might have just lost Red Bull as a sponsor for both of our organizations. I apologize for that. All right, so the last time you were on, I thought you did a really great job of untangling, that CNAP, CSPM, CIEM, CWPP, infrastructure as code scanning, that whole mess, if you will, that acronym confusion. I'm hoping you can do the same for, what I would call is another new cyber buzzword that I think is a little bit confusing to me and some others is, CDR, or sometimes you see it called CNDR or CTDR. I think they're all the same thing. So let's start simply. What is CDR?
So basically, CDR is, it stands for Cloud Detection Response, and it's a suite of capabilities that are designed to help organizations detect and respond to threats, live threats, in their cloud infrastructure environments, right? So if you would take the analogy of EDR, for example, right, which is Endpoint Detection Response, the idea there is to help you detect potential threats on your endpoints. So if someone is trying to execute a malware on your laptop or server, right? You would use an EDR, endpoint detection response tool, that would have very deep visibility into everything that's happening on your machine, right? So the analogy of that in the cloud or within the cloud infrastructure is CDR. Now, the difference between CDR and EDR, right? It's not only this is endpoint and this is cloud, is just also because cloud is more complex. It's combined of endpoints that are running on servers. Some of them are serverless, right? So you have the machine detection response, but you also have the network detection response. You have the identity and API call detection response, right? So it all comes together. It is way more complex than an EDR solution is. If you want to take the analogy of CDR to something, it's maybe what was called in the on-prem environment XDR, right? So something that looks broadly across your entire environment, looks at your endpoints, looks at your network, looks at your identities, and trying to combine all these insights together to detect live threats. So the extension of XDR to the cloud is CDR. Basically, that's the idea.
Yeah, question for you. Some XDR vendors kind of claim that they are doing cloud. Is that accurate? Is there a difference between XDR that does cloud versus CDR?
I wouldn't say that there is necessarily a difference per definition. It's all a question of how you go about doing that. What we've seen with on-prem technology is that often when they extend their capabilities to the cloud, they're not doing that in a cloud-native way. They're basically taking the same capabilities they had on-premise and extending those to the cloud. The most common example is how you do EPP, or how do you do workload security in the cloud. So in the beginning, what people have been doing, they took the tools that they had on premise, so there are security tools that they used on on-prem servers, and they ran those on cloud environments. That's great. That does provide obviously significant value, but ultimately cloud workloads are different from just the same server running in the cloud. You have also serverless environments, you have containerized environments. So ultimately there was a new space developed that is called cloud workload protection, CWP, and I think we talked about that in our previous conversation, right? So yes, you can do CWP with your traditional on-prem endpoint tools, but if you want to do CWP properly, you should do that with cloud-specific or specialized tools. Same goes for CDR. If you want to do detection in the cloud, you can do that in the same ways you're trying to do that on premise, but you can do that in the cloud in ways that are different, more cloud native, leveraging more cloud APIs, deeper cloud capabilities, and also something that covers the entire cloud stack, which is somewhat different from the on-prem stack.
Gotcha. So if I'm going to oversimplify it, XDR in the cloud would be sort of like taking a CrowdStrike, agent and putting it into on a VM, and it's going to provide a lot of value. But if you are cloud native and you're actually, like you said, hooked into the APIs associated with the cloud services, we're going to have a greater level of visibility.
Correct. Okay. And by the way, a great example, if you look at CDR vendors today, first of all, it's an emerging space, right? We at Tenable obviously have CDR capabilities. I'll mention that in a second, but there are other vendors, leading vendors that have similar capabilities. And you can see the different vendors started from different areas. Obviously, the vendors like CrowdStrike capitalizing on what they're doing best, which is, endpoint detection response, right? So their CDR is heavily built on their endpoint engine that they're using on premise, exactly to your example. We at Tenable, historically, even when we were a young startup called Hermetic back in 2019, our first generation of a cloud KIM capability had a CDR capability because we were monitoring API calls in the cloud and detecting anomalous API calls or anomalous user behavior, which is another way to do CDR without any agent technology, even without looking into machines. Obviously, today we have a CDR capability that is way more advanced that couples that also with an endpoint visibility, but that's an evolution, right? And you see this evolution among all the different vendors, where every other vendor started from a different place, but gradually everyone is kind of converging towards the same same kind of platform like visibility, exactly similar to what we have in CNAP, right? In CNAP, for example, WaiterMedic started from the identity space, Palo started from the workload protection space, et cetera, but ultimately everyone kind of converges to the same platform approach, obviously with different flavors. Same happens in the CDR. By the way, if you want to look at CNAP and CDR, it's like the pre-breach space, that's the CNAP, and post-breach, that's CDR. But it's looking at the same problem from two different angles.
Gotcha. So it's sort of XDR left or CSPM right? You know,
Correct. Exactly.
We're gonna converge somewhere in the middle, and then depending upon what the lineage is, that'll differentiate where one might do things a bit different, perhaps do things a little bit better. Okay.
Correct.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So let's actually talk about that. Because when we talked about this briefly in our last call, I got the impression that we could have added CDR into that acronym set because most of what you were already talking about, the CSPM, the CIEM, CWPP, effectively is an element of CDR. So is CDR just sort of endemic to a really comprehensive CNAP tool, or is CDR another add-on, if you will, to a CNAP tool?
No, this is a great question, and I think the jury's still out. I think if you look at that only from a pure technical perspective, you could say, okay, I'm looking at the same APIs, I'm doing very similar analysis. Why don't I build a CDR as part of a CNAP solution? It's a natural extension. It's the same technologies, but in our business, it's not only about the technology, it's also about the organization and people, right? Like everything that has to do with our organizations. And historically, CDR solutions or detection solutions have a different user. If you look at the key user for a CNAP solution, it's ultimately your cloud engineering or cloud security organizations. People that are using detection technologies usually belong to the SOC, right? Security Operations Center. They're using the SIM product. They're using the EDR, XDR product. It's a different user within the organization from the Aura perspective. It's a different buyer. It's a different budget. And these are different use cases. And sometimes you can find a situation where a similar technology breaks into two distinct products because the user and the buyer is ultimately different. So I don't yet know whether CDR in itself will be a standalone category that the SOC users would use, and it will ultimately basically integrate into the SOC or the SIEM product, or whether it's going to be a part of the CNAP solution and will be a module that will be sold on top of the CNAP solution, but for a different user. I think there is one difference between a SIM product and the CDR product, and why the affinity between CDR and CNAP so strong. If you're a hunter or you're a detection specialist or a SOC operator, and you have an anomalous behavior alert, whether it's coming from a machine or an API call, whatever, right? And now you want to investigate that alert. You do not want to look only at the activities and the alerts and so on and so forth. You also want to look at the configuration of your system. And that's why a strong CDR solution needs a CNAP attached to it, right? Because you see that user, you see that the user has accessed, a bucket with sensitive information in suspicious hours, right? Or from a suspicious IP address. You want to look at the configuration of that user. You want to look at the configuration of that bucket, right? You want to have that information at your hands ready to do your investigation. And this is something that traditional SIM products do not have, because they're mostly based on logs, et cetera, right? If you look at the Splunks of the world, the Sumo Logics of the world, they're giving you the suspicious behavior. But if you want to investigate the configuration of that user or machine or what have you, you have to go to another product. And that's why tying CDR to CNAP is so important, because if I run an alert on my CDR, and because my CDR is part of my CNAP platform, I enable the user immediately to see the configuration and the potential problems that might be with that user, which helps to run the investigation and do the triage, which is so important.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. That integration is going to be very interesting because, like, conceptually, we aspire to a single pane of glass, and having internal systems, as an example, feeding into a SIM, and having this CDR standing by itself doesn't make sense. So the CDR is going to have to talk to the SIM. The SOC is going to be, especially in a 24/7 shop, the SOC is going to have it. So it seems to me like the CDR is just going to be the back-end data source presented optimally for someone who is trying to understand whether a security event is a security incident.
Correct. What I think, and I believe what eventually would happen is that you're absolutely correct. The CDR will generate alerts. These alerts would flow into a SIM product, and a SOC analyst will see those alerts in the SIM product, which will be the single pane of glass for everything post-breach. But then, if they want to do an investigation of that alert and triage that alert properly, if they have a suspicion that this is indeed something serious, they would double click into the CDR product, which will have all the data pulling from the CNAP, pulling from the behavior analytics, et cetera, that would present all that context to the analyst so they can make a quick decision whether this is a false positive or a real live threat that they have now to go and investigate it into further. By the way, it's not very different from the EDR space, if you think, right?
No,
EDRs
I agree.
They're also shooting alerts into SIM, but eventually the investigation is done within the domain-specific product.
Yeah, and now you're getting into another interesting argument for platform vendors. The more I look at this, the more I think that the platform vendors in the security space are going to be the winners, if you will, over the next dozen years, just for this reason, right? I mean, if you're sitting in your SIM tool and you need to consistently go to other tools to investigate, just that process of going in and out of the different tools and them using you've got non-normalized communication of information, and even just subtle things where someone's referring to something as web, someone refers to it as HTTP, someone refers to it as 443, right? That non-normalization, it can be challenging, right? Especially in a stressful response. So it's a shame that you don't know anyone who heads up like product development anywhere that would be looking to figure out a way to kind of make all this stuff come together in a single unified platform, right?
So that's exactly part of the. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly the number one task I'm currently looking at. Trying to at Tenable we're leaders in the besides cloud security, the exposure management space, which is, if you like, is trying to, it speaks about exactly that, trying to consolidate all the security insights into a single platform, but pre-breach, right? We're not yet players in the post-breach space significantly besides the cloud CDR area. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly where the market is going to in a few years. You want to be able to look at the same platform, see the pre-breach, post-breach, and be able to connect the dots in a meaningful way. I think that's just the next phase of this cloud security or generally security evolution.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all of the things we talk about, attack surface management, configuration, vulnerability management, CSP, they're all the same fundamental idea at different points in a life cycle. Whether it's the life cycle of products being deployed and operated, whether it's the life cycle of an incident, right? So logically, the more visibility we have into, and in a weird way, it also plugs into that shift left concept, right? Because isn't fundamental attack surface management and vulnerability and configuration management just like the ultimate of shifting left? And like what we talked about, infrastructure as code scanning, right? Hey, that precedes CSPM, right? So yeah, it's a continuum, right? And what you're looking to do is ensure that you're going to be able to protect them through the full continuum.
That's right. I remember 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, when we when we were just starting Hermetic, right? We look at that in three, in 3D space. We said, okay, there are different cloud service providers, right? So you can have to support the 3 cloud service providers. There are different user types. So you have developers, you have dev, test, prod environments, but you also have the pre-breach and the post-breach, right? And you have to help organizations protect themselves pre-breach, post-breach. So, and it's not even a continuum, it's a cycle, because if you go from a pre-breach, you go to a breach, you have a post-breach, then you have remediation, you go to pre-breach again, right? So it's kind of a never-ending cycle where each organization is at some point, and sometimes in a number of different points, depends on the environment. One environment might be breached, one environment might not be breached, one environment was breached, and now you're in a remediation stage, right? So it's really challenging for organizations.
And it gets even more challenging for them and for you, because so often we conflate. In fact, we often get funding for security through compliance. And I've always said that, like, in the SIM world, security is about the signal, and compliance is about the noise, right? So we're trying to serve 2 masters with one system, and you're going to have the same challenge with, CNAP, right? Flowing into CDR is, these same tools are ultimately the largest value prop in many organizations, or the way that they get funded, is through compliance.
That's true. That's true. And, a lot of people confuse security with compliance, right? They think they are the same, and no, they're fundamentally different. Compliance is important for a variety of reasons, but it's not security. And you have to understand to what extent you want to be compliant and to what extent you want to be secured. And although I would say 80% of the time or 90% of the time, these objectives are not contradictory. There are 10% of the time where you really have to choose where you're putting your extra buck, right? So whether you're working more towards compliance, where you're enhancing security. And by the way, post-breach and CDR, it's more about security than compliance, right? Because to your point, it's trying to find the needle in the haystack, or the signal out of the noise, right?
Yeah, but I just think, as you, especially in your new product architecture, product engineering, role, it's inherently a challenge that you're trying to develop a product which has disparate end goals for different parts of the organization, but yet there's an expectation that if we're going to spend, a lot of money, that we're going to end up with both, right? So I'm glad it's your problem to solve, not mine.
Thank you. No, but I think
should we have had this conversation before you said yes?
but I think I think it's what makes the life and work of a product leader so interesting, right? You always have to understand your users, right? And to your point, if platform are going to be the winners, platforms ultimately solve more than one user, right? If the age of single use case siloed security solutions is over, and we're going to be offering solutions like CNAPs that talk network and talk identity and talk workloads, right? And talk data, ultimately you have different users that you have to cater to, right? You have the data owners, and you have the identity people and workload people, right? And developers. So it's a lot of users, and you have to build smart products that are able to speak multiple languages and support multiple use cases. But on the other hand, I think this new generation of products will also empower those users and help the users speak multiple languages as well, because in order to be successful security practitioner today, you have to understand various domains, and you have to speak a number of different languages. It's not only enough for you to speak network today, right? If you're in the cloud, you have to understand a little bit of identity, and vice versa, right? So I think this is the not only evolution of the security products, but also evolution of security experts and organizations and talent over time as well.
I would imagine that a product that a CDR product that comes to it from the CSPM CNAP side, one of the advantages that it would have is that because it's more cloud native, if I use that phrase, and it's more wired into the underlying services, it would have a higher likelihood of being able to, I'm going to say, automate some of the remediation and response. Is that true? And can you give me an example of it?
Yes, I would say it is. First of all, response in the cloud is challenging. If you think about response on-premise, right, the on-prem environments, it's split between the user environment and the production, right, or the backend, the data center environment. In the cloud, it's only the data center, right? So if I detect a suspicious process or malware on a user endpoint, unless it's the CEO's endpoint, I can immediately take it off the network. I can immediately shut it down, right? The impact on the organization is very limited to that specific machine, right? You want to be way more cautious if you're doing something like that on the server side, right? Because now you can have a tremendous disruption of your business. And in the cloud, it's always the server side, right? It's always production, it's always applications. That's why people are very cautious with automatic response in the cloud. Even on the preemptive side, right? Like, let's say I see a publicly exposed database or bucket, right? Some people are very hesitant with automatically taking that off the network or off the public exposure. Same goes obviously for with threats. But when you're cloud native, you have the broader context, right? You see the activity, so you can say, okay, I see that this machine, there might be something malicious on the machine. I won't take the machine off the network, but I will block some of the permissions that it has. So, for example, it's using a service account. That service account has, the ability to elevate privileges or some admin permissions it's not using, right? I can block these, and I know it's not using these permissions because I have this cloud native context, and I can block these, and there is no risk for the business, but I somewhat mitigated the threat of that malware until I do further investigation, right? And that's not something that you can do if you're taking only the kind of workload approach. You're seeing that machine, you're seeing that malware, but you don't have the broader context. You don't have any mitigating controls. You can either kill the process or not kill it, right? When you have the broader view from the CNAP solution, the cloud native view, you have a lot of additional mitigating controls you can leverage, and that's to your advantage, obviously.
Yeah, and you have more native visibility, right? So even if you're not using the automation component, you should be able to respond faster. Quick question for you. We have had the ability to automate response for a long. I mean, if I remember right, Okina Stormwatch was like, I remember when that product came out, and then Cisco bought it. Cisco, I as a security guy, I was like, okay, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Like, it was Tripwire on steroids, and we have Tripwire, right? Another great tool that's still out there. But yet and that's got to be 20 years ago. So for the last 20 years, we've had these capabilities to do automated response and cut these things off, and everyone is scared to death, especially with revenue generating systems, to actually do so. That being said, with the insane number of breaches that we're having and the cost and impact of many of them, right? Change Healthcare, $15 billion worth of healthcare claims processing impossible, people having problems in hospitals servicing sick patients. Should we be looking a little bit more and like, is the medicine actually, better than the poison at this point? Should we be leaning more into some automation?
That's a good question, and again, I think the jury's still out. I obviously I think we should be leaning into as much automation as possible. Obviously, in the cloud where everything is automated, right? That said, look at the recent CrowdStrike incident, right? You see, obviously the business disruption there with the problem with the security technology was way bigger than potential risks from cyber threats, right? So you have to be very careful about how you're using security tools and what you're allowing the security tools to automatically do on your environment, because if you misuse them or there is a problem with the tool, the business disruption damages can be pretty harsh.
Does the fact that we're in the cloud mitigate some of that though? So as an example, if you had a tool like an Okina Stormwatch and it took action on a conventional server sitting in a conventional data center, and it takes the server down, the process of spinning up a new server is fairly significant, right? It could take hours, it could take days, depending upon, the complexity of the application. In the cloud, right? If this is something which is, Kubernetes, it's really not that difficult to spin up something to replace something that went down. So does the fact that the cloud gives us those kind of capabilities, should that encourage us to lean more into automation of this nature?
I think ultimately yes, but you have to be very careful about how you do that. You really have to trust those workflows that you build out for those specific use cases. I think the more advanced organizations that I've seen, in the past few years, as I engage more and more organizations that operate in the cloud, the more advanced organization, they have this, you call that a risk ledger or what have you, right? They map out those specific scenarios, which are, from a security standpoint, are unbearable to those organizations, where they are willingly ready to enforce automation and remediate automatically those scenarios, either pre-breach or post-breach, obviously. And there are other scenarios where they're saying, okay, we got to have a human being, a person in the loop who kind of makes the decision and does the judgment. But I think the less advanced organizations still kind of trying to err on the side of caution. But I think you're absolutely right. There is no way that with the scale of organization, especially in the cloud, and all the automation that happens in the cloud, that people would have to be able to stick to manual processes and manual decision-making processes, mostly when it comes to remediation. A lot of that will have to be automated.
Yeah, I like what you said, that it's a risk-based decision. And I think that people are not making those risk-based decisions. They just fear automation and disruption of, let's say, e-commerce, right? So if we looked at this and said, at any point in time, we might have 6 shopping carts carrying, X thousand dollars worth of product in them that we might lose as sales. But in the event that someone dumps our client database, that is a $3 million or $30 million breach. Maybe it's not such a bad idea to drop a couple shopping carts, because half of them are going to come back and refill them anyway.
Correct. And you see that happening more and more. And by the way, a lot of those shopping carts, to put it in your words, are being dropped anyway, right? Because of other operational issues, right? So the downside of that is minimal in many cases.
Gotcha. So is CDR so if we were using your product, is CDR something that we license as something on top of the normal CNAP product, or is CDR just currently inherent in the CNAP product?
So currently it's inherent in the CNAP product. There is a slightly additional charge if you're using agent-based technology on your workloads, right? So we charge a little bit for that. But again, I think this pricing and licensing discussion, it's a moving target, right? We're still exploring this phase. We're still learning what the customers are looking for, and the market is shaping still. So maybe in a year down the road, once the market is more established, maybe it's going to be a different SKU that will be included in the whole CNAP product. But maybe some customers want to purchase only the CDR component because they have, they might have a different CNAP solution, right? So for example, already today, because we're leaders in the KIM space, we have customers that are using a different CNAP solution, but are using our KIM to augment that. So similar things
Really?
might happen. Yeah, it's pretty common.
Yeah, wow, that's actually So they're using somebody else's CNAP, CSPM, whatever component of it is, and your CIEM product on top of that.
Correct.
That's interesting.
So I think
I mean, I would imagine it's better than not using it, but if you can combine the two, I would imagine that there are sort of dangerous combinations of things which are more which are you don't have the capability of seeing if you're using disparate tools, correct?
Yeah, that's true. Although in most situations like that, they have all that information from us as well, or we integrate into the other CSPM as well. So I think that risk is minimal. But to your point, it's still better to have a single pane of glass. However, again, it goes back to the point of the different users. So, for example, the key user of a KIM solution is an identity person. They have different use cases that many CNAP solutions do not support, or most CNAP solutions do not support. That's why they need a different tool. And for a large organization, Fortune 10 enterprise, the additional cost of investing in an additional solution is much smaller, to your point, than the risk of a breach or a miscompliance. So it does make sense. Obviously, we're still going towards consolidation, but again, there might be a situation, a year or two from now, where an organization is using a CNAP solution from Palo Alto and a CDR from Tenable, or vice versa. I would not write that off, as easy. We see situations like that in similar domains still.
Interesting. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Anything we missed? We beat this up pretty good. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's just important to remember that, again, this is an evolving space. Whatever we say today, might still be relevant 6 months or 12 months down the road, or might be less relevant. So I would encourage everyone kind of to try to keep up with the pace to see what are the new things that are coming out, look what the vendors are offering, and make informed decisions.
Well, as always, you brought it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good luck with the new role.
Thank you so much, John.